In this nugget, we're going to analyse the language, structure and form of the poem Love's Philosophy by Percy Bysshe Shelley. In the exam, you will get a question related to the theme of love and relationships, so you must understand how these themes are explored in each of the poems in your anthology. The words love and relationships might not appear in the exam question, so you should know words and ideas that relate to these themes. On the right are some words that may appear in the question. These words might also give you ideas for the topic of your paragraphs. We will start by focusing on the theme of love. You might focus on unrequited love, unfulfilled love, or forbidden love, familial or platonic love, desire, lust or sexual intimacy, love and loss or the death of loved ones, possessive or oppressive love, which could link to jealousy, or memories of loved ones. Now we will focus on the theme of relationships. Some of the words or ideas related to the theme of relationships might be getting older, family ties or strong bonds within families, adultery and betrayal, nature or a relationship with nature, distance or growing apart, or the breakdown of a relationship. Let's look at the themes of love and relationships in Love's Philosophy. You should think of at least 3 or 4 different ideas for each poem that you could explore in your exam essays. Here are some ideas for Love's Philosophy. The narrator desires a woman, yet his desire is unfulfilled. Unfulfilled simply means something that is incomplete or unachieved. The narrator uses natural imagery to reflect the idea that desire is natural. Remember, imagery is when a poet or writer uses figurative language, such as metaphors or similes, to create a visual image in the reader's mind. Desire means a strong feeling of wanting something. The narrator is quite playful in his attempts to persuade the woman, but the reader might dislike his behaviour as manipulative. Now, manipulative means being sly and cunning to get what you want. Who is the speaker? One of the first things to consider about a poem is its narrative perspective. This will help you understand who the speaker, or narrator, is. Narrative perspective is the viewpoint that a story is told from, and remember, writing about narrative perspective will get you marks for structural analysis. Let's look at some structural analysis of the narrative perspective in this poem. The speaker, or narrator, of Love's Philosophy is a young lover who desires the love of a woman who is not mentioned in the poem. Although we only hear the speaker's voice, the reader gets the sense that this is a conversation between the lover and the woman. The questions he asks are directed at her, although we do not hear her response. The first idea that you could discuss in your essays is how the narrator desires a woman, yet his desire is unfulfilled. We will just focus on the first half of this idea, the narrator's desire. Let's look at some of the verbs used by the poet. Clasp, kiss. The speaker's desire seems to build throughout the poem to a climax in the second stanza, with repeated images of physical imagery. Now, a climax is the highest point of tension in a piece of writing. Words such as clasp, which means tight embrace, and kiss are repeated several times. The repetition reflects his desperation for physical intimacy and his almost obsessive desire. Repetition is when a writer repeats the same word or phrase several times. we're going to continue to focus on the first half of the first main essay idea, that the narrator desires a woman. Let's look at these two quotations. The fountains mingle with the river and the rivers with the ocean. One spirit meet and mingle. Now, let's focus on these quotes and analyse the structure. Arguably, many of the images in the poem have sexual undertones. For example, the description of the rivers running into the ocean gives the reader images of fluids mixing, which is perhaps a reference to sexual intercourse. Secondly, Shelley cheekily evokes Christian imagery when he talks about one spirit, but perhaps he is subtly pointing to the idea of sexual intercourse, when two bodies are united in sanctified union. Now, we're going to focus on the second half of the first main essay idea. This is how the narrator's desire is unfulfilled. Again, let's begin with a quotation from the poem. What are all these kissings worth if thou kiss not me? The final line of the poem is shorter by quite a few syllables than the rest of the lines in this stanza. This short last line gives the sound of the poem a sense of incompletion, perhaps to reflect how the speaker feels unfulfilled. His desire increases, yet it has not yet been satisfied. The question at the end sounds frustrated, because the speaker has not received the kiss he so longs for from the woman that he is addressing in the poem. Now, we're going to explore the second main essay idea, that Shelley uses natural imagery to reflect the idea that desire is natural. Remember, imagery is where writers use figurative language, such as metaphors and similes, to create a visual image in the reader's mind. To begin exploring this essay idea, we're going to look at two quotations. The fountains mingle with the river, and the rivers with the ocean. See the mountains kiss high heaven, and the waves clasp one another. Finally, and the sunlight clasps the earth. Firstly, we're going to link these quotations to some relevant contextual points to extend our analysis. Shelley was part of the Romantic movement. The Romantic movement was a group of poets, artists, and writers who all wrote about the beauty and power of nature. Romantic poetry often includes descriptions of nature, which reflect ideas of love and power. Romantics, like Shelley, believed that the beauty in nature was a reflection of God. In other words, everything in nature is beautiful, pure, and yet extraordinarily powerful, like God. In this poem, Love's Philosophy, Shelley uses natural imagery to suggest that desire is natural and beautiful. Let's analyse some of the language used in these quotations. Throughout the poem, Shelley uses a motif of nature. A motif is a repeated image that recurs throughout the poem. The speaker expresses his love and desire through describing the harmony and union in the natural world. He evokes particularly beautiful images of nature, such as rivers, mountains, and sunlight, to reflect how love is natural and should be embraced, not rejected. Shelley also personifies nature as a lover. The mountains kiss and the waves clasp to draw our attention to how the elements entwine and mingle, physically together like lovers. According to Shelley, we humans should take lessons from nature and open ourselves up to physical intimacy. Now, let's look at some subject terminology used in this analysis. Shelley personifies nature refers to personification, which is when a writer gives human characteristics to something non-human. There are a couple of pieces of vocabulary also used in this analysis, which you might be unfamiliar with. Entwine means twist together, and intimacy means being close. Now, we're going to continue looking at the second main essay idea, We're going to analyse the language in the key quotations at the side of your screens. We have already looked at the first quotation together. The fountains mingle with the river, and the rivers with the ocean. Let's look at two more quotations now. And the waves clasp one another, and the moonbeams kiss the sea. Much of the natural imagery in this poem focuses on the movement of water. The motion of rivers and the sea's tides are governed by powerful forces, such as gravity, a science the Romantics would have had a general understanding of. Shelley uses images of water in motion to suggest how his own love is overflowing and cannot be contained. He might also be suggesting that there are ungovernable or uncontrollable forces in the world that draw us toward each other, like the sea is drawn by the moon. We are powerless to resist and should embrace the invisible pulls that attract us to another person. We're going to move on now to the third main essay idea, which is that the narrator is quite playful in his attempts to persuade the woman, but the reader might dislike his behaviour as manipulative. Like before, let's begin with a quotation. See the mountains kiss high heaven. Let's analyse this. There is a playful tone in this poem. Tone is the narrator's attitude, thoughts, or feelings towards the subject. Shelley, to an extent, knows that he is oversimplifying the idea of love, which is very complicated. The use of hyperbole, which just means exaggeration, because he compares his desire to a mountain or the sea, makes his argument somewhat ridiculous and humorous. Shelley knows that his attempts to persuade the woman would be received as a bit of a flirtatious joke, but not a serious attempt to bed a woman. Let's link this language analysis to some context. Shelley would have known that in the 19th century, which is when this poem was written, there would be serious consequences for a woman who gave in to desire. Therefore, she would not give in lightly and would certainly not be persuaded by the arguments in the poem. Let's look at two more key quotations from this poem. Why not I with thine? And what are all these kissings worth, if thou kiss not me? Is his behaviour manipulative? The repeated questions in the poem might be part of a tease or flirtation. However, the questions also have a more aggressive effect, making clear the demands on the listener. These repeated questions can seem quite forceful, perhaps reflecting how the speaker feels justified in forcing his desire upon the listener. Let's look at another key quotation. No sister flower would be forgiven if it disdained its brother. Now, let's bear in mind our main essay idea, that the narrator is quite playful in his attempts to persuade the woman, but the reader might dislike his behaviour as manipulative. Many of the speaker's arguments are also dishonest. He describes how a sister flower would not disdain or reject her brother, making it seem as if all he is asking for is a harmless, platonic show of love. Now, platonic means non-sexual and non-physical. However, this poem is about desire, so suggesting he only requires the sort of love that a sister would show her brother is a lie, in order to make their love seem more socially acceptable. Let's link this language analysis to some context. In the 19th century, the only acceptable relationships between a man and woman were those of a marriage, where sex was sanctified by God. Sanctified means made holy or pure. Or family, for instance, the platonic or non-sexual love between a brother and sister.